They told me Salem had a unique nightlife, a certain historical flavor that clung to its ancient cobblestones and gas lamp-lit alleys. But the orientation for my new night gig at Wickett Grin, a dusty, disturbingly silent grocery store, tucked away on Chestnut Street like a forgotten tooth in a rotting gums, ended with a neatly handwritten list of rules that made my last job, biohazard cleanup, at foreclosed meth labs, seem like a pastoral walk in a sunlit park. I'm Theo Ambrose, 25 and adrift, and my new manager, a prim, soft-spoken man named Henry Albright, who always wore immaculate kidskin gloves despite the stuffy, spice-laden air of the shop, slid the laminated card across the ancient, scarred mahogany counter with a smile that didn't quite reach his unsettlingly placid, pale gray eyes. He warned me then, his voice a low, cultured murmur, to never ask what was really in the special meat section at the back. Just weigh it out with a polite, unwavering smile. And for God's sake, don't try to make direct eye contact with whatever seemed to be pulsing beneath the thick, blood-stained butcher paper. Most new hires, he'd added with a sigh that sounded like dry leaves skittering across a tombstone, didn't make it past their first encounter with a customer attempting to pay for 47 bottles of Mammon's Kiss extra infernal hot sauce with what looked suspiciously like a freshly shed, still faintly iridescent snakeskin. My move to Salem had been a desperate attempt to outrun the beige monotony of my life, the suffocating weight of a dropped-out college career, and a string of soul-crushing temp jobs. Wickett Grin, with its hand-painted sign depicting a leering jester and a grinning skull, had seemed quirky, an authentic slice of Salem's macabre charm. The reality, as I stepped inside for my first shift, was less charming and more actively unnerving. The air within was a thick, palpable cocktail of old paper, dried herbs I couldn't name, exotic spices that tickled the back of my throat, something metallic like cold, rusting iron, and a faint, sickly sweet, almost cloying undertone that reminded me vaguely of overripe fruit and formaldehyde. The lighting was abysmal, emanating mostly from flickering gas-style lamps affixed to the dark, wood-paneled walls, their flames casting long, dancing shadows that made the mundane stacks of canned goods and dusty bottles look like waiting grotesques. The silence between the wheezing hum of ancient refrigeration units and the occasional, inexplicable creak from the floorboards of the apparently deserted upper story was profound, pressing in on the ears. Henry Albright was the picture of antiquated respectability. Mid-50s, I guessed, slender with neatly combed silver hair, dressed in a starched, high-collared white shirt, dark trousers, and those ever-present butter-soft gray leather gloves. He moved with a quiet, precise grace, his footsteps making no sound on the worn floorboards. His voice, when he explained my duties, stalking, facing, manning the ancient, clunky brass cash register, was modulated, almost soothing, yet held an undercurrent of something else, weariness, or a deeply buried, tightly controlled warning. Wickett Grin caters to a discerning clientele, Mr. Ambrose, he'd said, his pale eyes unblinking. Many of our patrons have particular needs and preferences. Your role is to facilitate their purchases with discretion and efficiency. Then came the rules, presented on that small, surprisingly clean laminated card, placed beside the point-of-sale system. A monstrous brass and wood contraption that looked like it belonged in a Victorian bank, complete with bizarre, unlabeled ivory buttons and a tarnished crank handle whose purpose I couldn't begin to fathom. 3 rules for continued employment. Never ask what's in the special meat section. Just weigh it and smile. Don't question why some customers need 47 bottles of the same hot sauce. When customers speak in languages that make your ears bleed, nod politely and process their transaction. Understanding isn't required for service. I remember forcing a laugh. A weak, nervous sound. Right. Salem theatrics. Got it. Keep the tourists spooked. Albright did not smile. His gaze remained fixed on me, steady, unwavering. Theatrics, Mr. Ambrose, have their place. These are operational necessities for your well-being and for the continued smooth commerce of Wickett and Grin. He gave me a brief tour. The special meat counter was at the very back of the long, narrow store, shrouded in perpetual shadow, the glass of its display case perpetually fogged from within, obscuring whatever lay on the chilled marble slab. A small, tarnished silver bell sat on the counter, beside a set of equally ancient brass scales. Though I never saw a customer approach it directly or ring the bell themselves, I noticed a heavy padlocked door to one side, stenciled with a faded Aisle 3. Specialized stock, authorized personnel only. A bone-chilling cold emanated from the cracks around its frame, far colder than any freezer I'd ever encountered. A dry, sterile cold that seemed to suck the moisture from the air. The POS system, Albright briefly demonstrated, had additional payment screens accessible by a series of complex, unlabeled button presses. Barter, organic. Barter, ethereal. Sole indexed credit line. And most disturbingly, pledge of fealty. Manager override required. Albright left me alone then, retreating into a small, curtained-off office at the very back, the scent of cloves and something like burnt sugar briefly wafting out. My first customer of the night arrived shortly after, a woman heavily veiled in dark lace, her form indistinct in the gloomy aisles. Mrs. Canterbury, as she introduced herself in a whispery, rustling voice. She purchased only 3 bars of what looked like rough-hewn, grayish soap, its scent vaguely reminiscent of bone marrow and dried lavender. She paid with 3 strangely heavy, unmarked silver coins, each one crudely stamped with a different, distorted human face, its features twisted in an expression of silent, eternal agony. As she glided out, the small bell above the entrance tinkling with a sound like distant, breaking glass. I glanced at the large, convex security mirror bolted to the wall near the door, a relic from a more modern, but equally failed, attempt at retile. In it I saw the reflection of Mrs. Canterbury, but she wasn't walking out, facing the street as she was in reality. In the mirror, her veiled back was still turned towards me, as if she was still standing at the counter, watching me, even as her physical self departed. My skin crawled. This was going to be a very long night, and Salem's unique nightlife, I was beginning to suspect, had very little to do with witches and everything to do with places like Wickett and Grin. The first few hours of my shift passed in a blur of eerie silence and solitary stalking. The products themselves were often unusual. Yards of pickled items that looked suspiciously like eyeballs swimming in murky fluid. Tins of nocturne noodles for the discerning palate. Bags of dried, luminescent fungi that pulsed with a faint internal light. I tried not to think about it too much. Then a customer approached the special meat counter. He was tall, almost unnaturally so, and gaunt, dressed in impeccably tailored but old-fashioned clothes that seemed to absorb the dim light. His face was shadowed by the brim of a wide hat, but I could see his eyes, or rather, I could see too many of them. Each socket held what looked like a cluster of small, glistening black beads, all independently swiveling, observing me from multiple angles. He didn't speak, merely raised a long, gray, multi-jointed finger and pointed towards a darkly wrapped oblong parcel resting on the chilled marble slab inside the perpetually fogged display case. My heart hammered. Rule 1. Never ask what's in the special meat section. Just weigh it and smile. I forced what I hoped was a pleasant, non-inquisitive expression onto my face. My lips feeling stiff, I reached into the case. The parcel was cold. No, not cold, but radiating an absence of heat. and it felt strangely, yielding beneath the thick, blood-stained butcher paper. It was also heavier than it looked. As I placed it on the ancient brass scales, their needle quivered, then spun wildly, displaying a fluctuating, impossible jumble of numbers and symbols, before finally settling on 8.37 pounds. This, despite the parcel being no larger than a shoebox. Tulby. I stammered, trying to remember Albright's instructions for our unpriced organic assets. The multi-eyed man simply placed a small velvet pouch on the counter. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like dried moss, were 3 perfectly spherical, iridescent pearls that pulsed with a faint, inner light, like captured stars. They felt warm to the touch. I accepted them as payment, as per the barter, ethereal option Albright had shown me with a cryptic nod, as the customer turned and glided silently away. The small, tarnished silver bell on the meat counter gave a single, soft, clear ding, though neither of us had been anywhere near it. The sound seemed to hang in the air, expectant. Later, during the pre-dawn lull, when the store was utterly silent, Mara Burns, one of the day shift stockers, arrived early for her shift. She was in her early 30s, I guessed, with tired, haunted eyes that seemed to hold a universe of unspoken anxieties. She looked even paler and more worn than she had the previous day. "You made it through your first night, then," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper, as she clocked in. She glanced nervously towards the back of the store, towards aisle 3. "Listen, Theo," she said, her gaze darting around. "Albright, he's not what he seems. And this place, it's not just a store." She leaned closer. "Whatever you do, never go into aisle 3. Not for anything. Not if he asks. Not if he orders. The things they keep in there. They don't like being seen. They don't like being seen. And some of what goes in." She shuddered, her eyes clouding over. "Some of it doesn't always match what's on the inventory manifests, if you catch my drift. The freezer thermometer for that aisle? It's a lie. It always reads a few degrees above freezing. But the real cold in there, it'll freeze the marrow in your bones in minutes." Before I could ask her what she meant, the bell above the main entrance tinkled, announcing another customer, cutting our conversation short. Mara gave me one last, worried look and scurried off towards the stockroom. This new arrival was cloaked and hooded, their features entirely lost in the deep shadows of their garment. They approached the counter and began to speak. It wasn't a language, not any human language I'd ever heard, or could even conceive of. It was a horrifying alien symphony of clicks, guttural growls that seemed to vibrate deep in my chest, and high-pitched, piercing whistles that felt like needles being driven into my eardrums. My vision swam. A sharp, stabbing pain lanced through my temples, as if my skull were about to crack open. I instinctively clapped my hands over my ears, but it did no good. The sound seemed to bypass my auditory canals entirely, resonating directly within the bones of my skull. Rule of 3. When customers speak in languages that make your ears bleed, nod politely and process their transaction. Understanding isn't required for service. My ears. I touched one gingerly. My fingers came away wet and sticky. Blood, dark and warm, fighting back waves of nausea and vertigo. I forced myself to nod, to feign polite comprehension. The cloaked figure gestured with a pale, long-fingered hand towards several items on the shelves behind me. A dusty jar containing what looked like preserved, multifaceted eyeballs, swimming in a cloudy, faintly glowing green liquid. A small, velvet pack that seemed to squirm slightly on its own, and a bundle of dried, black, thorny vines that pulsed with a very faint, dark purple light. Somehow, through a haze of agony and encroaching unconsciousness, I managed to scan them. The ancient power system whirred, clicked, and then displayed the total, not in dollars, but in a series of rapidly shifting, unreadable sigils that burned into my retinas before finally, mercifully, resolving into a dollar amount that seemed far too low for such exotic wares. The customer paid by placing a single, perfect black rose on the counter. Its petals were like velvet, its thorns like obsidian needles. The moment the figure glided out of the store, the rose crumbled into a pile of fine, gray ash. Later, in the grimy, flickering light of the staff break room, as I was trying to stanch the slow, persistent trickle of blood from both ears, I glanced at my reflection in the cracked, grease-stained mirror above the sink. For a horrifying, gut-wrenching split second, the Theo in the mirror wasn't bleeding. He was smiling, a wide, predatory, utterly inhuman smile, and his eyes were entirely coal-black pits. Then my reflection was normal again, pale, shaken, and bleeding. But the afterimage of that other, monstrous smile was burned into my mind. The days, or rather, nights, at Wickett Grin began to take on a surreal, nightmarish rhythm. The Salem quirk explanation for the store's peculiarities had long since withered and died in the face of bleeding ears and multi-eyed patrons. This place was something else, something deeply, fundamentally wrong. Danny Latcher became a semi-regular, unsettling fixture. He was the store's delivery boy, a lanky 19-year-old with an unnervingly ancient gaze and a vocabulary that would have done a 19th century undertaker proud. He'd arrive at odd hours, usually through the backloading dock, hauling in crates that were often disturbingly warm to the touch, or others that seemed to writhe slightly from within, their contents obscured by thick, tarred canvas, or, on one memorable occasion, what looked disturbingly like stretched and stitched together pieces of pale, leathery skin. Even Mr. Ambrose had greeted me, his voice a strange baritone, already knowing my name on his first delivery, despite no introduction. Got a fresh consignment of artisanal inks, viridian hue for Mr. Albright. Handle with extreme care. Temperamental. He'd set down a crate that pulsed with a faint green glow and smelled faintly of copper and grave mold. The knuckles of his right hand, I noticed with a sickening lurch, always bore a series of small, weeping cuts. But the blood, it didn't drip down. It seemed to flow backwards, up his fingers, disappearing under his frayed cuffs. Time runs a bit differently for the couriers on certain routes, Mr. Ambrose, Danny had explained once, catching my horrified stare, his expression unnervingly casual, as if discussing the weather. Keeps the consignments fresher, see? Then came the hot sauce incident. A new customer shuffled in, small and hunched, with nervous, twitching movements and eyes that reflected the flickering gaslight with the multifaceted gleam of an insect's. They didn't speak, just scurried to a dusty, forgotten shelf in a dimly lit corner and began to pile bottles onto the counter. 47 of them, all identical. Mamon's Kiss Extra Infernal Hot Sauce, guaranteed to scour the sin from your soul and your lower intestine. The label depicted a leering, cartoonish demon bathing in flames. It was a brand I'd never seen stocked, never seen on any inventory list. Rule of 2. Don't question why some customers need 47 bottles of the same hot sauce. I bit my tongue, my mind reeling with the sheer, pointless absurdity of it. I rang them up. The total was, predictably, astronomical. The twitching customer paid by meticulously, silently, laying out 47 tarnished silver buttons on the counter. Each button was old, clearly handmade, and carved with a tiny, exquisitely detailed, screaming human face, each one unique in its expression of agony. I swept them into the till, my gloved fingers. Albright insisted on gloves for all staff when handling non-standard currency, recoiling from their strange cold weight. Later that same shift, just before the pre-dawn quiet, a customer who seemed more like a walking column of shadow than a person, their form indistinct, their features perpetually obscured, as if by a personal localized eclipse ordered a single large, unlabeled tin can from a locked cabinet beneath the counter. Albright had briefly shown me this cabinet on my first night, referring to its contents only as uncatalogued items, for discerning patrons only. Only refer to internal price guide Appendix Theta. There was, of course, no such Appendix Theta that I could find. When it came time to pay for the heavy, featureless tin, the shadowy customer simply paused. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, it reached up to its own forearm, or what I presumed was its forearm, deep within its shifting darkness. There was a soft, tearing sound, like wet leather being slowly peeled. The customer then laid a large, roughly rectangular patch of what looked, unmistakably, like perfectly tanned, unnervingly supple human skin on the counter. It was devoid of blood, yet it felt disturbingly warm and faintly resilient to my glove touch. Its surface bore a faint, intricate pattern that might have been a tattoo, or something far older. My stomach churned. I remembered Albright's emotionless instruction for my orientation. For non-standard tender of an organic nature, Mr. Ambrose, you will utilize the barter organic material function on the pose. Input estimated market value, or, if unsure, default to code Omega Prime. The system will adjust accordingly. I processed the payment, my hand shaking as I keyed in Omega Prime. The ancient register word clicked and spat out a receipt that simply read, "Transaction complete. Balance nullified." The skin remained on the counter, radiating a faint, disturbing warmth, until Albright silently collected it later, his gloved fingers handling it with a practiced, almost reverent care, before placing it in a lead-lined box he kept in his office. As I was cashing out at the end of that shift, preparing to face the gray, unwelcoming light of a Salem dawn, I allowed my gaze to drift towards the special meat counter at the back of the store. The perpetual fog on its glass case had momentarily cleared in one small patch. Through it, in the dim, pre-dawn gloom, I saw not the expected neatly arranged cuts of unidentifiable flesh, but what looked like a haphazard pile of pale, discarded gloves. Dozens of them. Some were impossibly long and slender, others disturbingly wide and flat. And as I stared, my blood turning to ice, I saw one of them, a glove with 6 distinct, perfectly formed fingers, give a slow, almost imperceptible twitch. The veneer of quirky Salem oddity had been sandblasted away by a relentless barrage of the bizarre and the terrifying. Wickett Grin wasn't just a store. It was a wound in the fabric of reality, and I was the unfortunate night nurse dressing its suppurating horrors. My curiosity, once a driving force, was rapidly curdling into a corrosive, stomach-knotting dread. But the alternative, quitting, admitting defeat, crawling back to my previous life of beige failure, felt almost as unpalatable. Almost. I started paying closer attention to Mara Burns, the haunted-eyed day stalker. Her warnings about aisle 3, her general air of weary resignation. It hinted at a deeper shared experience. I noticed her behavior was inconsistent. Most days, she was the Mara I knew, tired but friendly, quick with a cynical joke. But sometimes, usually if I caught her right at shift change, either as she was arriving or just as she was leaving, she was different. Her eyes would be vacant, her movements stiff, almost robotic. She wouldn't recognize me, or if she did, it was with a blank, uninterested stare. She'd perform her duties with a chilling, detached efficiency, her face a pale, emotionless mask. Then, an hour later, she'd be back to normal, with no memory of her fugue state. complaining about Albright's ridiculous scheduling. It was as if two different Maras inhabited the same body, one for the day, one for the twilight hours when the veil between Wickett and Grin and elsewhere was thinnest. My suspicion, my fear, began to coalesce around Henry Albright, his calm, his archaic pronouncements, his kidskin gloves that never seemed to come off, the way he handled the special payments with such practiced indifference. He was the constant, the eye of this particular storm. I had to know more. An opportunity presented itself one particularly foul night, when the wind howled like a banshee around the eaves of Chestnut Street, and the rain lashed against the ancient leaded glass windows of Wickett and Grin. Danny Letcher arrived with an urgent, unscheduled delivery for Albright. A small, heavily padlocked iron strongbox that seemed to radiate an intense, unnatural cold, and dripped a viscous black ichor that sizzled faintly where it hit the viscous floorboards. Albright, for the first time since I'd met him, looked flustered, almost afraid. He hurried Danny and the strongbox into his small, curtained-off office at the back, their muffled, urgent whispers barely audible over the storm. This was my chance. Behind the main sales counter, tucked away beneath a false bottom in a drawer, filled with dusty warranty cards for products discontinued in the 1950s, was Albright's private domain, a small roll-top desk, an ancient adding machine, and half hidden beneath a stack of faded supplier catalogs for things like ectoplasmic stabilizers and powdered mandrake root bulk, was an old, imposing, leather-bound ledger. Its cover was black, unmarked, the leather worn smooth and supple with age and frequent handling. With trembling, gloved hands, I'd started wearing them too, a futile attempt to create a barrier between myself and the store's miasma. I opened it. The pages were thick, creamy, filled with Albright's neat, spidery, archaic script. This was no ordinary store ledger. It listed names, dates, and transactions. October 17th. Client, the Hooded Parliament. Acquisition. 1. Fully expressed human scream. Female, soprano, terror-induced. Payment. 3 moon silver shillings. November 5th. Client, Old Man Hemlock. Deceased, but accounts outstanding. Barter. 47. Bespoke regrets. Mine are mostly pertaining to Miss T engagements. 411. Vile Tears of a Forgotten God. Diluted. December 12th. Procurement agent. Ache donation. 1 pint. Typo negative. Unzulide. Source. Transient. Unmissed. 4. Continued lucidity. Monthly tithe. My blood ran cold. There were names I recognized from obscure Salem histories. Accused witches. Forgotten merchants. And there were other, chillingly contemporary entries. And then, near the bottom of the most recent page, dated only yesterday, prospective conduit assessment. Theo Ambrose. Theodore. Initial readings. High empathy. Latent psychic resonance. Untrained. Significant unresolved existential disillusionment. Prognosis. Promising. Suitable for advanced negotiations following standard acclimatization period. Next sourcing stage. Exposure to aisle 3 emanations. TA my initials. Sourcing stage. Drawn by a horrifying, irresistible compulsion, my gaze drifted towards the padlocked door of aisle 3. The bone-chilling cold emanating from it was more intense tonight. A palpable wave of icy dread that seemed to whisper directly into my mind. I pressed my ear against the thick, ancient wood. The whispers from within were clearer now, though still not in any recognizable language. They were sibilant, multi-layered, filled with a cold, calculating amusement and an immense, ancient, bottomless hunger. And beneath the whispers, A soft, rhythmic, wet drip. Drip. Drip like something thick and viscous, striking a cold stone floor. Over and over. The ornate iron doorknob I now saw was coated in a thin, shimmering layer of rime. Despite the relative warmth of the main store, it looked like a frozen scream. An interesting choice of reading material, Mr. Ambrose. Albright's voice, soft as disturbed grave dust, came from directly behind me. I hadn't heard him approach. I spun around, my heart hammering, the heavy ledger still clutched in my hands. He wasn't looking at the ledger. His pale gray eyes, like chips of winter ice, were fixed on me. His lips curved in that same unsettling smile that never reached them. Curiosity, as I may have mentioned, he continued, his voice a silken thread, is a perishable commodity in an establishment such as Wickett Grin. Some doors, Mr. Ambrose, are best left to those who hold the precisely calibrated keys, and who fully comprehend the delicate nature of the necessary exchanges required to keep them functioning. He took a slow, deliberate step closer, and the scent of cloves and burnt sugar that always clung to him seemed to intensify, now mingled with something else. The faint, coppery tang of fresh, spilt blood. One of his kidskin gloves, I noticed with a fresh wave of horror, bore a small, dark, glistening stain near the knuckle that hadn't been there before. Later that night, after Albright had dismissed me with a chillingly polite nod, his eyes promising unspeakable things if I ever overstepped again, I found it, lying on the dusty floor just outside the padlocked door to aisle 3. As if it had been dropped or purposefully left, was a small antique silver locket. It was intricately carved with intertwined serpents. I recognized it instantly. Mara Burns, the haunted daystalker, wore one exactly like it every single day. This one was empty, its delicate clasp broken, and it was cold, so incredibly cold to the touch, radiating the same bone-deep, soul-sucking chill as the forbidden isle itself. It felt like holding a piece of frozen, captured despair. The discovery of Mara's locket, cold and empty at the threshold of aisle 3, was a grim period at the end of a terrifying sentence. Albright wasn't just a quirky manager of a peculiar store. He was a predator, and I, along with who knew how many others before me, was his designated prey. The acclimatization period mentioned in his blood-chilling ledger was clearly nearing its end. He became more overt in his manipulations. He'd accidentally leave me alone to handle a customer whose guttural, ear-bleeding language was accompanied by a visible shimmering in the air around them, their payment a handful of teeth that were still disturbingly warm. He'd forget to restock mundane items like milk or bread, then subtly suggest I offer a nervous-looking elderly woman a can of nocturne noodles or a vial of essence of distilled moonlight instead, his eyes watching my reaction with keen, analytical interest. Each successfully navigated transaction, each suppressed shudder, seemed to please him, like a scientist observing a particularly promising specimen. The psychic pressure in the store intensified, a constant, low hum beneath the surface of reality. The whispers grew louder, no longer confined to aisle 3 but seeming to bleed from the very walls, from the ancient, scarred floorboards. Sometimes late at night, when the store was empty, the items on the shelves would subtly shift and rearrange themselves when my back was turned. Then came the special order. It wasn't announced by a customer walking through the door. It arrived as a thin, sibilant whisper that seemed to coalesce directly inside my skull, bypassing my ears entirely. The voice was genderless, ancient, and filled with an icy, implacable hunger. "It is time," it hissed, the words forming not from sound but from pure, cold intent. "The vessel requires sustenance, the unopened heart. From the third chamber. Fetch." Simultaneously, The small, tarnished silver bell on the special meat counter at the back of the store began to ring. Not a soft ding this time, but a frantic, incessant, demanding peal, as if shaken by an invisible, impatient hand. The temperature in the store plummeted by 20 degrees in as many seconds. My breath plumed in the suddenly frigid air. Albright emerged from his curtained office, his face a mask of grim, almost solemn satisfaction. He held a single, large, ornately carved iron key in his gloved hand. "Ah, Mr. Ambrose," he said, his voice betraying a hint of something that might have been excitement, or perhaps just profound relief. "It seems our most discerning patrons have placed a specific request, a significant one, and they have specifically requested your assistance in its fulfillment." He offered me the key. "Consider it a privilege, Mr. Ambrose, a final test of your aptitude. The unopened heart awaits in aisle 3. My blood ran cold. Aisle 3. Mara's warning. The frozen locket. The whispers from the ledger. But the psychic pressure, the sibilant command echoing in my skull, was unbearable. A promise of unimaginable agony if the request was denied. My hand, seemingly of its own volition, reached out and took the heavy ice-cold key. The padlock on aisle 3, usually so formidable, sprang open with a soft click at the key's touch. The thick wooden door swung inward with a groan that sounded like a dying breath, releasing a wave of sterile, absolute cold that stole the air from my lungs and burned my skin. It wasn't an aisle. It was a void, a chamber carved from living ice and shadow. The shelves lined not with products, but with horrors. Jars containing what looked like silently screaming, disembodied faces, preserved in a glowing blue ichor. Sacks made of stitched-together skin that pulsed and writhed with unseen contents. Cages holding shimmering, intangible motes of light that whispered forgotten names. And in the very center, on a pedestal of what looked like black, volcanic glass, bathed in a faint, pulsing crimson light, was the unopened heart. It was an orb of pure, polished obsidian, roughly the size of a human head. Its surface impossibly smooth, impossibly black, absorbing all light. It pulsed with a slow, rhythmic beat, like a monstrous, sleeping heart, and radiated an aura of immense, ancient, utterly alien consciousness. The cold emanating from it was a physical pain. The ones who order through the meat counter. Albright's voice came from behind me, startlingly close. He had followed me, and they are particular about their acquisitions. His breath misted in the frigid air. This store, Mr. Ambrose, is a nexus. A weak point between realities, a trading post for those entities who have needs that your mundane world cannot fulfill. They barter for the esoteric, for life force, for distilled emotions, for memories, for the very essence of what makes you human. He took a step closer, his pale eyes gleaming in the crimson glow of the heart. I, Mr. Ambrose, am merely the humble broker. It is a delicate balance, one that requires periodic recalibration. He smiled. That terrible, mirthless smile. My own longevity is a testament to my skill in these negotiations. But the price is steep. The tower always demands its due. He gestured to the obsidian orb, and sometimes it demands a new conduit, a new gatekeeper, someone to bear the burden of the transactions. Mara, I choked out, the cold making my teeth chatter. What happened to Mara? Albright sighed, a sound like dry ice cracking. Miss Burns was promising, but ultimately she lacked the necessary detachment. When she resisted her final attunement, the entities of this chamber did not destroy her. They merely fractured her, a piece of her remains bound to Wickett and Grin, her daylight self blissfully unaware of the price Her other half pays in the twilight hours. Her essence slowly bartered away, fragment by fragment. He looked at me, his gaze like a scalpel. You, however, Mr. Ambrose, your existential disillusionment, your unique resonance, you are far more suitable. The psychic pressure from the heart intensified, a crushing weight on my mind. The whispers from the shadowy corners of aisle 3 became a chorus of demands. The heart, the conduit. It is time. They grow impatient, Albright said, his voice a low, urgent hiss. Complete the transaction, Theo. Offer them the heart, and in doing so, offer them yourself. Become part of the store, part of me. It is your only path now. He reached out a gloved hand, not to help, but to push me towards the pulsating obsidian orb. This was it, my final sourcing stage. I was to be the next offering, the next soul fed into the insatiable maw of Wickett Grin. My essence propping up Albright's monstrous existence. A wave of cold fury, born of desperation, and a primal urge to survive, surged through me. The unopened heart pulsed before me, its silent beat echoing the frantic hammering in my own chest. Albright's gloved hand was on my shoulder, surprisingly strong, urging me forward. The chorus of sibilant whispers from the shadows intensified. A vortex of alien hunger and cold, calculating intellect. The conduit. Accept. Serve. My mind raced, desperately sifting through the horrors of the past weeks. The rules, the ledger, Mara's fractured existence, Danny Latcher's bleeding hand that defied time. Bleeding hand that defied time. These entities, these patrons, they operated on a logic, however twisted and inhuman. Contracts, barter, exchanges. Albright himself was bound by some ancient pact. You said this store is a nexus, Albright. I managed, my voice hoarse, the frigid air burning my lungs. A trading post. What if I offer them a better trade? Albright's grip tightened. Don't be a fool, Ambrose. There is no bargaining with the void. Only servitude or dissolution. But you bargain, don't you? I countered, stalling, my eyes darting around the horrifying chamber, looking for something, anything. The ledger. Procurement agent. HAU source things for them. What are you, Albright? In their eyes, a valued partner, or just another perishable commodity, clinging to a prolonged existence by feeding them scraps like me? A flicker of uncertainty of anger crossed Albright's usually placid features. I am the gatekeeper. I maintain the balance, a balance that always seems to tip in your favor, it seems. I shot back. My gaze fell upon a small, almost unnoticeable detail on the obsidian pedestal supporting the heart. A series of tiny, almost invisible sigils, identical to some of the unreadable characters that had appeared on the PO system when the ear-bleeding customer had paid. And beside them, a small, tarnished silver bell, identical to the one on the special meat counter. The bell. It rang when a transaction was accepted. An idea, insane and desperate, sparked in my mind. I shrugged off Albright's hand, took a deep, shuddering breath, and addressed the shadows, the whispers, the overwhelming presence of the ones who order. You want a conduit, I called out, my voice surprisingly steady. You want a gatekeeper who understands the true nature of exchange. Someone who can bring you fresher offerings, more potent resonances. I took another step towards the heart, then paused. But what is the price of his continued service? I flung a hand towards Albright. Henry Albright, your long-standing blood merchant. What pacts bind him? What debts does he owe this nexus for his Extended tenure. The sibilant whispering in the chamber faltered, replaced by a low, contemplative hum that seemed to vibrate the very ice beneath my feet. Albright stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief, then dawning fury. "What are you doing, you insolent whelp?" "Just asking the right questions, Henry," I said, my gaze fixed on the obsidian heart. "Rule 1, right? Never ask what's in the special meat." But nobody said anything about not asking what's in the blood merchant's contract. I reached out a trembling finger, and before Albright could react, I tapped the small silver bell on the pedestal beside the heart. Dingy. The sound was deafening in the frigid silence of aisle 3. Clear and resonant, like the striking of a funeral chime. The reaction from the unseen entities was instantaneous. The contemplative hum ceased. A wave of icy, furious intellect slammed into the chamber. A psychic shockwave that threw me back against a shelf of silently screaming, mottled faces. Albright cried out, clutching his head, his carefully constructed composure shattering. The obsidian heart pulsed violently, its crimson glow flaring, and from its depths, a new voice emerged. Not a whisper, but a chorus of 1,000 rustling, ancient voices, speaking in perfect, chilling unison directly into my mind, and I suspected into Albright's. The blood merchant's contract is indeed overdue for renegotiation. His ties have grown stale, his offerings predictable. Albright's face was ashen. "No, I have served faithfully. I have maintained the channels." "You have served your own preservation," the chorus corrected, its tone devoid of emotion, cold as the void between stars. "A new conduit offers fresh perspective, greater potential. The old account must be settled." Shadows, deeper and colder than the ambient gloom of aisle 3, began to coalesce around Albright. Not the shadowy forms of customers, but something far more elemental, something pulled from the very fabric of the hungry void this store tapped into. They were tendrils of absolute blackness, edged with a faint crimson glow, and they snaked towards him with a terrifying, unhurried purpose. Albright screamed, a raw, animal sound of pure, abject terror. The sound of a man who had bargained with devils and had finally, inevitably lost. He stumbled back, trying to fend off the encroaching shadows, but they were everywhere, seeping from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. His kidskin gloves smoked and smoldered where the shadows touched them. The store itself seemed to be revolting. The lights throughout Wickett Grin exploded in showers of sparks. Shelves toppled with a crash of shattering glass and spilling unholy contents. The incessant ringing of the bell on the special meat counter now sounded like an alarm, an apocalyptic fanfare. Danny Letcher, the delivery boy, appeared briefly in the doorway of aisle 3, his face pale, but his eyes holding a strange, almost serene understanding. He held up a single, black-edged envelope. "Special delivery, Mr. Albright," he said, his voice no longer boyish but ancient and resonant. "Contract termination notice. Effective immediately." He then vanished as silently as he'd appeared. Albright was engulfed. The last thing I saw was his face, contorted in a mask of ultimate horror, his eyes wide with the realization of his own damnation, before the shadows consumed him entirely, leaving not even a trace. The psychic pressure in aisle 3 vanished, replaced by a vast, empty, waiting silence. The unopened heart, on its obsidian pedestal, ceased its crimson pulsing, its surface now a flat, indifferent black. The bone-chilling cold in aisle 3 remained, but the palpable sentient hunger was gone, or perhaps sated. For now, I stumbled out of the forbidden aisle, my legs shaking so badly I could barely stand. The main store was a wreck. Broken jars and shattered bottles littered the floor, their bizarre contents, pickled eyes, luminescent fungi, what looked like congealed shadows, creating a grotesque, stinking mosaic. The gas lamps had all extinguished, plunging Wickett and Grin into a profound, suffocating darkness, relieved only by the faint, eerie glow emanating from some of the spilled products. Mara Burns was standing near the front counter, amidst the debris. But it was the other Mara, the vacant, robotic one. She was calmly, methodically, sweeping up shattered glass, her movements precise, her face utterly devoid of expression. As I approached, she didn't look up. "Closing procedures initiated, Mr. Ambrose," she said, her voice flat, mechanical. "Inventory reconciliation pending. Please vacate the premises." There was nothing left for me in Wickett and Grin. I turned and fled, bursting out of the ancient grocery store and into the gray, unwelcoming light of a Salem dawn. The air outside, usually so thick with history and the scent of the sea, felt thin and sharp in my burning lungs. I didn't look back. The next day, Wickett and Grin was gone. Not boarded up, not condemned, simply gone. Where the ancient gas lamp-lit store had stood on Chestnut Street, there was now a vacant lot, overgrown with weeds, surrounded by a hastily erected chain-link fence bearing a generic property under development sign. No one in the neighboring shop seemed to remember it ever being anything but a vacant lot. Henry Albright, Danny Latcher, Mara Burns. It was as if they, and the store itself, had been neatly excised from the fabric of Salem's reality. Only I remembered. I left Salem. I moved 1,000 miles away, to a bland, sun-drenched city in the Midwest, as far from ancient cobblestones and whispering shadows as I could get. I tried to live a normal life, found a mundane office job, attempted to scrub the taint of Wickett and Grin from my soul. But it never truly left me. Sometimes, in the sterile aisles of a brightly lit 24-hour supermarket, I'll catch a faint, familiar scent, cloves and burnt sugar, or the cloying sweetness of bone marrow soap. My reflection in the polished chrome of a freezer door will sometimes, for a horrifying instant, show a face with eyes like black pits, smiling that wide, predatory smile. And once, late at night, as I was browsing the international foods aisle, looking for something exotic to break the monotony, a low, sibilant voice whispered directly into my mind from a dusty can of imported, fermented fish paste. "We remember your potential. Conduit. New opportunities are always arising." I dropped the can and fled. Last week, a small, unmarked package arrived at my apartment. It was wrapped in plain brown paper, tied with coarse twine. There was no return address. Inside, nestled on a bed of dried black moss, was a single ornate iron key, identical to the one Albright had given me for aisle 3. And beneath it, a small, neatly handwritten card. It simply read, "Help wanted. Night shift. Inquire within management." There was no store name, no address, but I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the core that somewhere, in some forgotten corner of some shadowed city, another door was opening, another bell was waiting to be rung. Understanding, I had learned, was never required for service, only for sacrifice. And the ledger of Wickett and Grin, I suspected, was far from closed. It was merely waiting for its next willing or unwilling entry. And the faint, almost imperceptible taste of blood was always on the back of my tongue whenever I heard a language I didn't understand.